And Ash, we're here. We're back.
Here.
We have our viewer.
Yes.
Keeps coming in, saying nice things, which is really nice.
Hello, viewer. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Viewer, please hit the like button because it's much appreciated.
Smash likes. And yeah, I've seen the bell now. You mentioned the bell. If you click the bell, it will then tell you. We've now got it set up as a playlist. So if you click the bell, every time we add to the playlist, it will notify you that we've posted a new video. And also, I've discovered that with the playlist, I don't know how to do this yet. I will find out. But you can actually create an RSS feed of a playlist, apparently, on YouTube. So you can feed it into your podcast newsreader, whatever that means.
Wow.
These were words that I read somewhere. They mean nothing, but they were still
That sounded so technological, yeah.
Yes. So apparently...
Not only did that sound technological, but when you said RSS feed then and feeding into it, sounded slightly more interesting than the first half of the story you had us reading this week.
Oh, get lost. Right, okay, are you ready? Right.
Oh, God, that felt uncomfortable.
It's great. I've got the way the microphone set up. You can really pick up the... See, that's great. This week, we've been reading the Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Yes, the Old Nurse's Story.
The Old Nurse's Story. And its quick synopsis is basically, it's told from the point of view of an old woman telling a story to some children about how their mother, who was an orphan, grew up in this old manor house and how she ended up there. So... basically, the person telling the story, the narrator, if I'm going to be technical about it, she was hired as a nurse to look after the baby, and then the parents died very suddenly of illness, and this child was suddenly taken away to Northumberland to go and live in a manor house with an old aunt. Because the bloke who was now in charge of this one, because that's the way, things were back then, it had to be a man who was the charge of this poor orphaned girl. And so they hired her to still look after her as she was growing up. And she goes off to live with this old aunt in this big manor house, classic Gothic manor house, including an east wing that is locked up and nobody goes into. Absolutely on the money. So they're running around the house and having a good time, and then ghostly things start happening. There's the ghostly events of the organ just starts playing, and on further investigation, it's actually broken to such a degree that it can't play, but it still plays nightly, and it gets more and more. And then we have ghost children tempting the child out and almost killing her in the snow. And then the old woman has regrets that come out in a massive crescendo of ghostly goings on. That show how basically evil and cruel the gentry, and in particular the gentry patriarch, were back then, but also how cruel sisters can be to each other, because the main crux of the story is the sisters. The old woman in the house, I've got to look this one up. I've written it down there. Furnival. But it's Grace Furnival that you're actually living with, because Maud is the one that actually they both curried favour with this foreign gentleman that was teaching their father to play his organ, and it was Miss Maud who got off with him basically and secretly married him and had a child by him. And when the father and the sister, who was also had fancies on him, didn't like this, and then when the father found out about it and found out the child was there, didn't know about the marriage, basically kicked the daughter out into the snow for her to die, beat the child in such a way that old child also died out in the snow. And Miss Grace, the old woman, watched the whole lot happen and did nothing. And she grew old with that regret in her life, to where the final words that she speaks are, that you do in youth cannot be undone with age, which I think is the most poignant part of the whole tale. So that's the general gist of this 1852 Victorian Gothic ghost story from the often noted for her realism novels, Elizabeth Gaskell. And so here's the question, kids. Here's the question. I know what's coming. What do you think, Ash?
You were absolutely right. The final line with "Alas, alas, what is done in youth can never be undone in age. What is done in youth can never be undone in age." Not only is that the most poignant part of the story, but that was my favourite part of the story as well, because it meant it had finished. And yeah, I was so real. Yeah, I know that was a cheap one. Right, what did I think to it? The first half of the story just dragged. I thought when we started getting spooky stuff in there, in that case, yeah, the spooky stuff was well done. And I think we've got Elizabeth Gaskell, who's renowned for being quite a realistic writer. She's very good at portraying people across all social milieus. She's very good at portraying. I mean, it's said it was unusual, or people are often surprised that she's writing ghost stories because she's normally so far removed from the supernatural. But she did have sort of like an interest in the supernatural and a belief in it. She thought she'd seen a ghost at one point in her life. She'd been in various places that she believed were haunted. So she'd got an interest in the supernatural. But yeah, for me, my main criticism against the story is that first part was so much exposition and setup that could have been truncated down. A few weeks ago, you were telling me that you'd been watching the guys who write Inside Number 9.
Yes.
That they were talking and saying with a lot of the Netflix series that they see, they would have condensed them down to a half-hour episode.
Yes.
And I think this could have been condensed down to so much more. I think an awful lot of the setup with, I mean, for a start, she starts off and this nurse is saying, "Oh, well, your mum was an orphan." And then she just carries on with the story. We've got no fucking idea who she's talking to there. That part just seemed to...
I mean, look, I'm going to come back on a certain bit in a second, okay? But you do. She's talking to... As you learn who she's looking after, which is Rosalind. I think that's right. Yeah, right, Ms. Rosalind. That's the mother of these children. She's obviously talking to children. And I think you've got to take things in a historical context sometimes, because the way that the setup is right at the beginning is the fireside ghost story, isn't it? Your mother was young once, when your mother was your age, almost, sort of like type story to sort of like spook the kids with. So that setup, I don't think is going with that. But I'm about to agree with you on some of this, because I agree with you that the first half of the story, once you got that setup, that's fine. And once you got the setup of where they're going, that's fine. But there was a huge section that was just didn't go anywhere. And I couldn't tell how old the kid was for a bit, because it was sort of like, I wasn't sure how old Rosalind was. I'm sure it's Rosalind. Hang on. Please excuse me, because my brain is not 100%. Rosalind. It is Rosalind, yeah.
I've got Rosamund.
Oh, is it Rosamund, is it?
Yeah, Rosamund. Yeah.
So my brain's just changing letters. All right, so Rosamund is you kind of get the impression she's a babe in arms when the parents die, and then the next thing she seems to be a toddler. And then when she's going out and the ghostly stuff starts to happen, you're thinking, is she about 5 or 6? You couldn't quite determine the age of the child, even though the actual description of the manor and is just wonderful. It's got all this other stuff around it that doesn't seem to take any explanation within it itself. So until we get to the point when the spooky stuff starts, it was a bit hit and miss, I thought.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that would have put me off. If this hadn't been used up like saying, you must read this actually on pain of death, in that case, I probably wouldn't have gotten past page 2. It would have been a case of, do you know what, life's too short.
But you've got to admit, when it gets into the meat of the ghost story itself, her style is magnificent in pulling together this just like cacophony of ghost tropes.
Yeah, there was an awful lot of them in there. I mean, we've got the whole Bluebeard's Castle thing of, well, you can't go into this part of the house. That's forbidden. But again, it would have been nice, as you say, to see that expanded upon. Why can't you go into that part?
You do later. You do later. That's the strange thing about it is, but it's so much later on that you find out why you don't go into that side of the house.
There were parts that I did like. I think my favourite line in the whole thing, and probably the most haunting line that I've ever read in any piece of fiction, is the sentence, "But the old lord never touched his organ again."
Yes.
And yeah, that left, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
The chills went up my spine there. Yeah.
The as time passes and innuendo gets so much easier, that was it's not as it's to be perfectly honest with you, it's not as good as Watson and Holmes ejaculating at each other all the time, but it's right up there in the Victorian,
it
where
was
the language
a lot of
changed.
fun, yes. The fact that the foreign musician was helping the old lord get to grips with his organ, it was just and so we've got racism in there. I mean, this foreign musician doesn't get a name. He's only referred to as being a foreigner, and we've got sort of like all the negativity that's put against musicians, because we all know musicians have got this habit of wearing brown shoes with black trousers, and I don't know what's going on there. And also, he's a musician, so we just can't trust him. And a foreigner as well.
But I love the fact that he inspired him so much that he built this organ into his house. Because that was the other thing as well, was it wasn't just an organ sat in the hallway, like we used to have in the 70s, when, the organ with the rumba beats that nobody ever played because they read one page of a how to play the organ book and then just left it there as furniture or whatever. All right. But this was it felt like it was built into rooms. Like she goes into this room for the bellows, and the fact that the bellows are so deteriorated shows that his organ doesn't work anymore, through age.
It's becoming a tragedy now, rather than just a horror story, once we've sort of like passed that halfway point and we're getting into his organ deterioration, and we're getting into the fact that she can hear the organ being played, and everybody's saying, "No, what organ? All it is it's just the wind outside. You're a bit thick, aren't you?" Then it starts getting into the whole, there's something odd going on here. Which when, as you say, when it kicked in quite well. It was very, very entertaining.
Yes.
I think I like the whole idea that I like the fact that it's a child in jeopardy. Because when it's a child in jeopardy, it just works so well. That's why The Shining works so well, because you've got a child in jeopardy in there. I think the fact that we've got snow in the background worked on a number of levels. The fact that we only get to see one set of footprints, so we know something supernatural or spooky has gone on. That
was great. Yeah, that was a nicely put part, wasn't it? And I thought the way that she used her dialogue as well around that, when she was questioning the child and pointing out the footprints, and then the child's insistence that there was someone there was great.
The child saying, basically, I'm a kid, I wasn't watching footprints. Yeah. I'm paraphrasing slightly there, obviously, but although, that would work really well for dialogue, wouldn't it? Now I think about it. I thought there were some good things going on with it, but why did it need all that long-winded introduction? Was she getting paid by the word?
Probably because it was originally published in a magazine, Household World. I think it was a woman's magazine that it was published in. And she was already doing a serial in that magazine as well. So I think it was kind of like partly to do with that. It's actually one of her, she's written a number of supernatural tales. She's actually done a almost like a play of the Salem witch trials.
Right.
As well. So she does some really interesting stuff. But this is only one of two that she's actually got ghosts in. And I quite liked it because we haven't really done ghosts. That's why I kind of wanted to bring it in. But like I say, it's been a long time since I read it. This is one of the tales. The thing about this kind of story is this is one of the ghost stories that I read when I was a child. And all the realism actually worked for me as a child, because it was one of those, everything was, it was Victorian age. And I thought that the description of Victorian age was really, really good. And now I'm older, yes, it was actually duller because of that, though when I was younger. However, these were appearing in books where you never really found out who the author was. They were just stories, and they never really put authors' names on them. So I didn't really know who it was until recently, when it's turned up in the Weird Tales, which is a publication of women's literature, and that's when you suddenly realise how many bloody supernatural stories and weird stories from the Victorian age were written by women for magazines. It's quite astonishing.
I'm worried that I'm going to be misogynistic if I start. I mean, every time you bring in a female author, I'm just sort of like there pissing on her from a great height, sort of like Shirley Jackson, no, Demon Lover.
Actually, there is a parallel, to be perfectly honest with you, because both of the female authors I've brought into this so far are actually renowned for their hyperrealism. And both stories actually suffer for the same reason, is that they both use a kind of a hyperrealism in the description that then makes the supernatural and non-realistic side of stuff have more impact. Though I think Shirley Jackson did hers better, granted.
So do you think then that perhaps one of the most effective things that could be done in contemporary media to create something of a similar ilk would be if they had a ghost appear in something like Coronation Street or EastEnders, without making it into a big, oh, there's a spooky ghost, but just having some spooky thing sat behind a character that nobody's aware of? That
would be awesome. They almost did it in Coronation Street with Vera and Jack Duckworth. I'm trying to remember which way round it was. I'm sure it was Vera. I think Vera died before Jack. Yes, so Vera died before Jack. So when Jack died, Vera came into the thing just at his last moment. So they kind of did it in that, right, bringing in that idea. But I think that's a fantastic idea to do it, and not, like you say, just not draw attention to it. Have one of the old characters just in the background of a scene and let everybody talk about it online as if, did you just see that? That would be that would be incredible.
I think that would have that sort of like that reality to it that would have people genuinely crapping themselves.
But I'll tell you why the reality works, particularly in ghost stories, is, and I'll refer you to a book that you found terrifying when you were younger, and that's the Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I was terrified of the book and I hadn't even read it. Right.
Yeah.
Then I read it not so long ago and I didn't like it. Again, it's that, I think, is that older, but I think it was just describing this house. And half the time I was just thinking, why didn't you just leave? There is that part of it. But I think if you look at all the great horror stories, if you go in particular ghost stories, they all start with an element of hyperrealism. The Woman in Black works well on stage because you're sat in the theatre that he's hired. Yes. So you are already aware of your surroundings. Now, remember, in the Victorian times, they were still playing with schemata. They still didn't know. That's why Dickens has very sort of like detailed descriptions of everywhere, because they didn't have the idea that you could just use a couple of words and everybody would know what you were talking about and create the picture in their own heads. That's why a lot of people struggle to read Victorian novels, because they are hyper detailed in everything that they're trying to do. And if they're doing a caricature, it's over the top and makes it more difficult to read. So maybe it is part of the mechanism of creating a really good ghost story is to have that realism. And like I say, how terrifying would it be to be sat there watching EastEnders and Dirty Dens in the background again, or whatever,
Or Barbara Windsor, yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be so awesome that you just get a reflection of Barbara Windsor in the window at the Queen Vic, just for the split second, and just not mention it on the social media. Just let the viewers mention it. That would be great.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah,
that would make me watch EastEnders.
Yeah, if they decided each year, do you know what? It's October. Let's do something really, really spooky for Halloween.
Yeah.
And yeah, they threw something like that in. I would watch the shit out of all of those. Yeah,
Just the whole of October would be EastEnders because you know it's going to happen at some point.
It would even make me watch Emmerdale, yeah,
Yes.
just in case Annie Wilkes turned up there again, or Amos Brayley.
Well, let's say so they had a bloody plane crash there. They got quite a few that could turn up in the windows there, haven't they?
They had that plane crash with that magical horse that was running around saving people's lives.
Yeah.
Which,
Again, you see, they've already brought fairy tale into these things. They've already brought supernatural elements into them, but they just haven't gone the whole hog. You know, they haven't gone down the Dallas route or soap, you know, and having a possessed baby upstairs that wants to kill everybody in the house. They haven't quite gone that far.
It needs to do that, definitely.
It certainly does.
Definitely. So we've got the fallen woman. We've got two sisters unhappy with one another. We've got a lord who's hitting a mixed race child with his crutch, which. So we've got an awful lot going on in that second half. And as I say, when the second half kicked in, sort of like the worry that, because I didn't know where the story was going, when Rosamund has disappeared at first and Skanky Woman's looking around for her, whose name I can't remember, Doris or...
well, there's Dorothy.
She's called, the old nurse.
Dorothy.
Anyway,
when
the old nurse is looking around for her, I was sort of like worried, thinking, has Rosamund sort of like been taken out into the snow as she carked it out there or something? Even when the shepherd was bringing her back, the description doesn't tell you whether she's alive or not, which I thought was very, very well handled. And you don't realise that she's alive until she's been brought back and then starts telling you that she's been out walking with Spooky Child.
Yes. And that was, I thought that whole sequence of events was just, like you say, it was beautifully handled. When I love the fact that they're looking for her and she's upstairs when she looks out the window, and it's only by the moonlight, when the cloud moves, that she sees the footprints in the snow. And you just have that moment, don't you, where you kind of feel the emotion that she's feeling at that time. Of like, oh my God, you know, because you know how cold it is, and you just, you know, you have that sunken feeling of, oh my God, is she dead? Is she dead in the snow?
Yeah, which like, dead kids do make for scary things in fiction anyway, because obviously, they're really kind of sinister and creepy in Pet Sematary. When you've got Gage at the end of that, he's frightening, really. Yes.
Or, let me in, Michael, I'm your brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Salem's Lot, probably the scariest thing I've ever seen on TV.
And the book was, again, I probably read that maybe a year or two after the Amityville Horror, and Salem's Lot was frightening to read at that time.
King's great for realism again. He does that hyper-realism at the start of things. I always remember in Bag of Bones, he spends the first 3 chapters talking about an accident. This guy's lost his wife, and he spends 3 chapters talking about this accident, and all the time you're going, oh no, she died that way. Oh no, she didn't. Oh no, she died that way. And when you actually find out how she died, it's one of those, it was utterly, utterly heartbreaking. Even though we do spoilers on it. We don't care, do we? Bag of Bones, right? So basically you find out that his wife's died. Then you find out there was an accident with a lorry. And you're sort of like, oh no, she got hit by a lorry. He's right, she got hit by a lorry. Then you find out that the lorry actually crashed into a shop. These 2 are women in it. And you're thinking, oh no, she was in the shop when the lorry hit. And boom, there she is dead, right? And then in chapter 3, you find out she wasn't even in the shop. She was further down the road, and she had an embolism, and she fell over and collapsed. But everybody went running to the accident of the lorry going in. So she just died on the pavement in the sunshine.
Heartbreaking,
and yet also slightly anticlimactic. But you just don't see where it's coming from. And it's just like, what? You know, and so you do spend a lot of the time just trying to figure out what's going on. So, you know, I think we're a little bit spoiled by the writers that we have that are standing on the shoulders of these influential writers previously.
Almost certainly, yeah.
You know,
but I don't think there's anything wrong with being spoiled. I think I think that's the way we're meant to go as a society. We're meant to sort of like stand on the shoulders of these giants, and and be able to see much, much further. So yeah, I don't see that as being a problem.
No, that's. I mean, it's fair comment. It wasn't what I was quite meaning, but it was just the kind of like. I think it's interesting to look back at where these come from, because now we started talking about Stephen King, which I think is going to be a weekly feature. Every single Victorian 100-year-old horror story that we read, we're going to go, oh, you can find that in Stephen King. You mentioned The Shining, and you know, and I mentioned Salem's Lot, and I actually think both of those you could argue had influences within this story, because the way that she describes the child ghost banging at the window, when it comes back again, but also the footprints in the snow that lead off, and the way that she's, you know, the way that the child describes that she went out to the snow, and the mother who's also in the snow. It's not just ghost children. The ghost mother wants to kill the child as well. You know, that had a kind of very King feel about it, I thought.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of build-up towards what was going to happen in the conclusion, certainly. I was being disparaging to start off with, and my screen name at the moment is that women authors suck balls, which I don't mean, well, I suppose some of them might, but yeah, I don't mean it in a misogynistic way. It's just been an unfortunate thing that the last couple that we've looked at have been women authors that are very heavy on their technical detail, and it just seems rude to the reader. If I've got a reader out there and they're spending time reading something I've created, the idea that I'm wasting their time, or that, oh, and you know when you sat in a pub and somebody says, oh, I've got this anecdote to tell you. So I was walking home the other day and I went down, and they give you every fucking street name, and you're thinking, just when did you get mugged? All right, get to that part. And and I went and found that lovely red brick house, and it's got, I don't give a shit about it. When did you get mugged? All right, yeah.
But I will go back to this, because really, Elizabeth Gaskell should be compared to Charles Dickens. That's where the comparison should really sit, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, she was a very good friend of Charlotte Bronte. They used to exchange lots of letters. They met in Windermere.
I actually read somewhere in one of the, because I decided to do some research this time rather than none, which is my usual thing. But I read somewhere that the reason she wrote this particular story is because Charles Dickens almost bet her to do it.
Really?
That again, I have I couldn't find any other reference to it when I read that. It was just, I read that, so oh, that's an interesting take, because I know that he used to edit a lot of magazines.
Yes.
At the time as well. So, you know, and I thought, oh, maybe it's in one of the magazines that he used to edit, and it wasn't. But that would be an interesting thing. I'm gonna see if I can dig into that a bit more and find out where that comes from. Because her writing, her entire writing career started because she lost a child.
Yes.
And basically, the child was 9 months old and died, and to deal with the grief, her husband told her to write, and so she started writing stories, you know, just to be able to deal with the grief,
which is harrowing and heartbreaking, really. Yeah, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. The whole idea of writing a story for a bet, yep, completely on board with that. I mean, we've done it ourselves, haven't we? Yeah. Can you do this particular story as a bet? And yeah. And yeah, it works. And I suppose the fact that we're getting a story from somebody who's very religious, but it's discussing their supernatural beliefs, I suppose that makes it even more spooky supernatural. Is that fair?
I think so. I think you are reading something from a point of view of belief. So it's not like someone like me, when I write a ghost story, I don't believe in ghosts. but I know all the mechanics of a ghost story, and I know how to make something frightening. Where when she's writing this ghost story, she's writing it from a point of she believes. So,
Yep.
you know, and I think that does come across a little bit, to be perfectly honest with you. There's certain parts of it. It's really interesting. I will make this point in the fact that she does 3 different types of haunting, all in the same in the same story, which was quite interesting, because I do actually know quite a bit about the ghost side of things from a past life of when I did used to believe. But she starts off with the sound, which is the idea that something that cannot work is working on a supernatural level, which is the old man's organ, right? So the old man's organ is working on a supernatural level, basically. Then
I've had people say that to me.
It's almost like it just works on its own. Just works on its own.
Yeah.
But no apparitions at that point. No apparitions of the old man. But it's just the story that this sound that you're hearing is this old man's organ. Then you move on to Ghost Girl and Mother, who deliberately communicate with a living child in order to lure her away for her to die, so that they could create sorrow, almost like they're feeding off negative energy, like James Herbert's The Dark, that sort of thing. And that gets recounted in what the housemaid, housekeeper Dorothy talks about when she finally gives in and tells the story of, oh no, not that wicked child, which I think is how she describes her to start with. Then it moves on to being a stone tape type haunting. So, once the girl comes back and starts banging on the window and then start locking the child up so that ghost child can't lure her away, it then goes through to the we now discover right at the end why you're not going into the East Wing, because that was where the sister lived, was the East Wing. But then you get it played back like a video. You're now watching a replay of the past rather than being an interactive spirit like the one that lures the kid away. That I thought was great. And then what really threw my mind was the old woman is in that vision.
Yeah.
And so you're not even looking at a ghost at that point, because one of them's not even dead. She's actually stood there watching her own vision, which relates back to the painting, which is, again, painting of Dorian Gray. It relates back to what we were talking about when we did the mezzotint of this obsession with paintings and portraits. So you've got these really 3 very, very different supernatural ideas, and they all happen in a very short space of time towards the end of the story.
Yeah, and the fact that they're fitted in there so well is what works. Again, it's just the fact that they're in right at the end. If they'd been either spread out throughout it would have helped build the narrative tension. It just annoyed me that there was so much unnecessary development. But as you say, that's all down.
You wouldn't write it like that nowadays. I think that is very much a trope of Victorian writing.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, and I know it's me being a bitch and it's me being picky and arsy about these.
No, Ash! No!
No, it is. Yeah, no. All right, maybe it's not.
No, because it's a valid point. I mean, it's a very valid point, because you'll get some people that will always sit there and go, oh, no, you want to read the canon. You want to read Victorian writers. They were the ones that knew how to do you want your Dickens and all that kind of rubbish. Not saying anything. Got a lecturer, loves Victorian writing. But but I think it's kind of, as a writer, because this is where, let's talk about it in that respect at the minute. You wouldn't write it like that nowadays. If you were writing that ghost story nowadays, you genuinely wouldn't do it the way that she wrote it. However, a lot of Victorian ghost stories are written in that way. They are written in that, that's where people like H.P. Lovecraft and H.G. Wells broke the mold, by where they were changing the way that Victorian style was definitely going on. But in that Gothic, particularly in the mid 1800s, it was really pulled out setups, a bit like you get on some of the, like you say, like commenting before about the Netflix series. where you can sit there and watch 3 episodes and you're like, this is just dirge. One exciting thing happens that keeps your interest to continue watching. And that's kind of how that Victorian ghost story used to work. Definitely.
Yeah, and I suppose there's also the way things are presented anyway. It was it Jane Austen? Or it might have been Jane Austen who pointed out that the tension within a story, you know when a novel's going to end because you can feel the thickness of the pages, sort of like there aren't that many left.
Yeah.
And you know that the story's going to end. You know that this is going to be a ghost story because it's in a Christmas collection of ghost stories. So I suppose there is that perception that, oh, I'm about to read something spooky and everything seems normal. I'm fairly content with the normality so far because I live in a normal world. And then too many pages in, it's, oh, that wasn't expected, or his organ shouldn't be working, yet it was.
Yes. Yes. I think that's where you're saying is the pacing nowadays, where it was very sort of like almost departmental in the way that they used to write of, here's your normality. Welcome to normality. This is what a kitchen table is. This is what a kitchen table looks like. And here's the 5 times we sit around this kitchen table with nothing happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Todorov's discussion of equilibrium and disequilibrium. And this whole notion that a story state starts off in equilibrium, then moves to a state of disequilibrium, and then moves on to a stage of repaired equilibrium for continuing. And I think nowadays, in a modern writing, that equilibrium needs to be established within the first paragraph so that you can quickly move into the disequilibrium. And I think, Victorian writers had got a lot more scope to concentrate on the exposition of the setup. And this is, as you say, we're going to sit around this table 5 times and chuffle's going to happen.
Yes.
But
it's on the 6th time when you're not expecting it. That's the way that they would do it. When nowadays we would go, you sit around the table once. Yeah. Sit around the table a second time, something spooky happens, and then it starts to escalate. Where back then they would sit around the table 5 times before anything started. But then the escalation is much quicker when it does happen, I think. So when you get the spooky playing with the organ, that goes on for some time. But once you get the meat of it, once you actually get the actual ghost, because it never really explains, you never see him playing it. It's just a herd thing, isn't it? All the time it's just him explaining it. But once you get once that ghost child appears, it moves at a pace. It really takes off at that point. So it does seem to kind of just hold everything back so that it could then fall out of itself, really.
It's delightfully unsettling, and we've got a death by the end of it as well. So it's ticking all the boxes. Yes,
but I agree. It's one of those. Nowadays we'd call it padding, wouldn't we? It's got a lot of padding in the particularly. I think the opening's quite nice, but that bit as they're going to find the manor house, the lead up to getting to the manor house is just too much. I think at a time, you don't need to know that he's that the Lord obviously won't stay there, that she's a bit disappointed that this really big manor house isn't the big luxury one that she thought she was going to. It's the big not luxury one that she's going to. It's that there's a few moments like that where you're sitting there going, oh God, it's a short story. You don't need the kind of Hobbit journey going on.
Exactly, exactly. But I did enjoy it. I enjoyed the second half more than the first half. Yes,
and a great last line.
Yeah, which last lines are essential.
Where do you think the actual horror is in this story? You've asked me this a number of times. I'll ask you on this one.
I've got that written down as a question. Where is and I suppose to me, the horror in it, and perhaps it's with being a parent, is the horror of the vulnerability of a child. Maybe that's what unsettled me. Yeah, because obviously with being white and male, I don't worry about exclusion of foreigners, and I don't worry about anything that's sort of like patriarchal, because I'm part of the patriarchy.
Brutal father figures, yeah.
Yeah, they don't seem to worry me. But yeah, the whole notion that a child could be taken out of safety and put in danger, I suppose on several levels that's quite worrying.
Yes. I think that was definitely one of the moments horrific. For me, I thought the horror in the real world that the old woman, Grace Furnivall, regretting that moment and, almost being in glee of the moment when her father was striking this child because she wanted that guy, and then being so old and regretting it in such a way that it basically tore her apart at that point. I thought that was...
That is kind of a powerful image, yes. And yeah, I think that is, is that more tragedy than horror? I mean, it's upsetting and disturbing, but or is horror tragedy, or is tragedy horror?
I don't know. It depends when you look at the definition, isn't it? Because there's horrific horror and then there's fear in itself. And that's not fear. That's just horrific. It's that idea of, it's almost like the finding out that you're wrong and that God does exist. And, all of a sudden you've lived your life all this way. You have this complete regret that you actually haven't worshipped this one that can now make your life, afterlife, wonderful. And, it's just that those moments of you cannot take it back. And I think that's where that last line kind of comes in, where it's just that whole, it's like a melancholy, isn't it, to it all, really? It's
it's like a sadness. And I suppose it's a sadness that's got echoes that we can all sort of like empathise with, because we've all done stupid fucking things in our youth that we're never going to be able to take back. We've all hurt people in the past. We've all said, done, or, we've upset people in some way. We're never going to be able to change that. So, I suppose it does drive it home on that level.
Yeah, and I think that's 1850s. They were doing that. We haven't learned much, have we?
You want to hear the title of next week's?
Go for it. Hang on. Let's do this as a proper question. Ash, what are we reading next week?
I'm so glad you asked. Next week's story is Pigeons from Hell.
Pigeons from Hell?
By Robert E. Howard.
Pigeons from Hell by I have never heard of this.
Pigeons from Hell by Robert E. Howard. Stephen King called it one of the best horror stories of the 20th century. Robert E. Howard, he's famous for writing Conan the Librarian and lots of space stories and other things. But this is, Pigeons from Hell. And is it public domain? Public domain, yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. Well, just the title on its own makes me want to read that. That's fantastic.
Titles are brilliant. With a student, I've just recommended that he reads Robert Rankin's The Hollow Chocolate Bunnies of the Apocalypse.
Yes.
Not just because it's a brilliant book, but also it's an awesome title.
Yeah, he does great titles. I mean, he has The Sprouts of Wrath. He has Armageddon, the musical.
And Drugs and Sausage Rolls, yeah.
Just brilliant. So, titles are great. That's what we were discussing before we came on air tonight, actually, where I've got this new short story. I have no idea of the story itself. All we've got is a title, and that is The Profile of Dorian Gray. And it's kind of inspired by people's profile pictures being much younger than they actually are in real life. So... Yeah.
Well, I did point out that we're all, everybody's profile picture is younger than we are in real life.
Well, this video, we actually recorded these videos 10 years ago. We don't actually look like this now.
Yeah. No, I've changed gender since then.
I'm
male now.
I've changed socks since then.
So next week. Pigeons from Hell.
Pigeons from Hell. That's awesome. That's absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I thought it was a great conversation. I've actually changed some of my way of thinking a little bit on that as well, to be perfectly honest with you. So yeah, really enjoyed it.
I think after chatting with you, I appreciate it a lot more than I did before.
Yeah, it's funny
Likewise.
how this works, isn't it? So yes, great. Looking forward to this one. That's actually brilliant. So thank you very much for watching. Usual thing, subscriptions, free stories. If you don't know what I talk about when I say subscriptions, free stories, go back and watch the other ones and you'll find out. Yeah. That's how
hit the like button and tell friends.
Tell friends,
and if you didn't enjoy it, tell people that you can't stand.
Yes.
That's why
we say fucking shit a lot just to try and get an audience. That's all. The only reason we've been watching other YouTube channels, and this is what they do.
If you didn't enjoy it and you want to tell friends, what my brother once did for me when I was very, very young, probably 4 or 5, he told me that the woman on the test card, you know, the one who got the Humpty Dumpty doll, he said at some point during the day, she turns round and she winks at you. So I spent hours watching the test card, waiting for this thing to turn around and wink, which it never did. But tell friends that, there's something, it's worth watching. You can't remember which episode. Yeah.
Talking about the test card, I can't remember which episode, but I don't think you've watched them back because it's. I mean, to be honest with you, have you seen it? The test card.
Yes, it's
when you go
brilliant.
off and get the Coke with a little bit of Halloween music over the top of it as well.
It's awesome, is that? Yes.
So occasionally you've got to watch these things because every so often I will put something crazy in the middle of these things.
Which is foreshadowing for what you're probably going to do on the edit on this one.
I'll just keep adding. I'll find other bits when he was talking about stuff he liked, and I'll just edit that in. So brilliant.
So
all right.
Please hit the like button. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. See you later now.
Cheers now. Bye.
Bye.